Suzanne's Paparazzi Jewelry, 24/7 shopping available. 160920 is the code. Show her some love, like she showed us. K&A Custom Crafts on Facebook.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Whatever on Wednesday. I have a very special guest. Typically, I try to keep it fairly lighthearted on Whatever on Wednesday, but tonight I have a guest and we're going to delve into, we're really honoring the 20th anniversary of September 11th. And I have a special guest here tonight, Matt Bochy, and he's an author and of Sway, a great book if anybody'd like to pick it up. And I think after the episode, you may be inclined to do so because Matt's going to speak about it and his story. So join me in welcoming Matt to the show. Hi, Matt. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And I think some of our viewers probably saw or heard your appearance on Adversity and Inspiration, my reported audio podcast, and they may have a tip off in some of your story, and I tried to promote that this week as well. But why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more about you and your story and a little bit about your father? I think that he's really one of the focal points here. So I'll hand the microphone over to you.
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Matt Bochy. I in a lot of ways, 9/11 is the starting point of my story, but I also view September 12th as the beginning of my life in a lot of ways. I lost my dad, John Bochy. He worked in Cantor Fitzgerald on the North Tower, in the North Tower. On the 105th floor. And my quest to figure out what happened to him started pretty much right after he died. Basically what ended up happening to me was I was under the impression that my dad may have been one of the individuals who jumped to their death. And it was an obsession of mine to figure out exactly what happened to him. And so I embarked on this journey, and it was a destructive one for sure. But I spent countless hours every day after school looking at images of people jumping, videos of people jumping and hanging out of the windows of the North Tower, under the assumption that maybe I could find him in one of those photos. And unbeknownst to me at the time, some of my family didn't know that my dad did not jump to his death. But I had a uncle through marriage who lied to me and told me that my dad did jump and use that as a way to prey on my vulnerability and ultimately sexually abuse me. And so all of these feelings that I had at the time, particularly shame and guilt and embarrassment, judging my masculinity in a lot of ways too, led me to coping by using drugs and alcohol. And I escaped for many years. Gratefully and luckily, I was able to pull myself out of it. And I'm now over 6 years sober, but it was a long process, an arduous process, and a path to peace and serenity for sure.
So yeah, that's summing it up really in a nutshell. But I don't know if the viewers understand that at the time you were only 9 years old when this occurred, and you were actually in school that day, and we were watching it. Am I correct? And unfold on the screens, or
no? So I didn't see it in school. When I got home later that day, I saw the footage on TV, and that was the first time that I had seen everything. And it was certainly, it was a lot to handle. And that was the first time I saw an image of someone jumping. And I don't think it was shown on television after that day. But it was hard for me to process when I was in school too, because kids were getting pulled out one by one. And yet my brother and I were kept in school that day, which is the reason because my mom actually spoke to my dad, and she felt it was best to keep us in school so we didn't have to see what was going on at the house, essentially referring to people there and trying to figure out where he was maybe, or if anyone had heard anything from him. So it was definitely the right decision in a lot of ways, but it was a lot for me to handle and understand at 9 years old.
I can't even empathize, and I'm not going to even suggest that I can, because I think that's the weight of that tragedy is just overwhelming, I'm sure. And tell us a little bit about your dad. We want to honor him, and then we'll really get more into it. And I also want to, I like to honor your mother as well, but tell me a little bit about both of your parents.
My dad, he was 38 years old when he passed, but he lived life to the fullest, and that really is a testament to the type of man he was. He was a family man. He was an amazing father, amazing husband, and everyone really loved him. He was just a genuine, happy person. And my mom, raising 4 young boys, it was a struggle in a lot of ways, but she stepped up to the task and she did it successfully. I don't blame her for anything that I went through. It's none of it's her fault. But she embodied the role of both parents perfectly. And she certainly has kept my dad's legacy and name alive.
That's a great testament to her. I think really something that struck me about your story is that you were speaking about how your father had indicated just prior to his death that he was really unfulfilled in that job and he was looking to make a change, and unfortunately he didn't have the opportunity to do that. I mean, how does that weigh on you, knowing that he was really in a spot that he didn't want to be, and it really was just a unfortunate stroke of fate. I don't even know. I don't even like to characterize it as that, just a random act, really. I think it was just, oftentimes I think life is random. People people say that things happen for a reason, but it's really difficult to say that in this scenario. I can't imagine anybody really uncovering a reason for that horrific day.
Yeah, he certainly alluded to the fact that he was unhappy. He wanted to find his passion in life. He had ideas of what he wanted to do, and I think that's one of the most heartbreaking aspects of his death is the fact that he didn't have the opportunity to do that. But he had voiced the weekend prior to 9/11 that he was going to finally do it. And so when he called my mom that morning, she instinctively thought that he actually finally had done it and that he walked out. And he was calling to tell her that a plane hit the building. So yeah, it was, sorry about that. So yeah, he didn't have the chance. And I often viewed his death as, I don't know, that there must have been a reason. And I don't know if the reason was all the things that I'm doing now. I can't really speak on that, but it's hard sometimes to process it and fundamentally say, yeah, like this happened for a reason. Like, your dad was taken from you at 9 years old. He was 38. He had a full life to live. So I do believe in that, but it's still sometimes hard to grasp that.
I do. And, I've seen pictures of your father. I mean, he was a striking man, actually, in great shape. And it's really difficult to see. And of course, looks don't factor in. But when you see him with your family and you just see how he just looked like the perfect family man. And then to have that ripped away and ripped out of your family is just really just struck me, because I've seen the pictures from the book, your mom and your dad with the all 4 of you, and I have 3 sons of my own, so it resonates with me so well, just the 4 of you there, and what a tragedy that is. So let's talk about what happens after that. So you became obsessed with the jumpers, and what was the significance of that? What would it have meant to you either way, if he was a jumper or he wasn't? What were you trying to uncover and figure out and discover?
It really didn't have a meaning as to, I don't know. I think in some ways I looked at it as, if he did do that, would I have handled facing death so abruptly in the same manner? Would I have taken it into my own hands, right? And chosen my way out. So I think in some ways that's why I did it. But in a lot of ways I wanted closure. I thought and I was, like I said, under the assumption that he did do that. I thought that by seeing him in a photo or potentially a video, some sort of reel, I don't know, if I saw him hanging out of the window at least, or just, my whole objective was to put together the last pieces from the phone calls and the time that the building collapsed, and try to fill in those missing gaps and think that maybe I could do that. So intuitively, I thought it would give me some sort of, I don't know, maybe closure. In hindsight, if I ever did find something like that, I don't think it would have done anything other than probably bring up a multitude of other questions and concerns, and also just the desire to know more. I know for a fact that I would have been determined to find out more, and there would have been no way of finding out anything else. So it was a dead end road, and I know that now. But back then I was naive, and I thought, well, maybe I could figure it out. Maybe I can, I don't know, defy the odds. Like, many people didn't have any closure. They didn't have the unequivocal knowledge of, okay, this is it. This is my family member, right? And if they suspected that maybe someone in one of those photos was their loved one, most of the time they weren't able to really prove it. So how was I as a teenager, right, able to do that when adults really couldn't do it? So it was, in a lot of ways, it was obviously unattainable, but I still believed, and I held on to that belief that I could find it, and I was determined to do so.
I think oftentimes when something unimaginable happens, because there were no answers for that day. I mean, there were, but there weren't. I mean, so I think that the mind, the human mind, is just needs to be satiated, and they're trying to find answers just to understand it. And I think that that's probably, what you were doing in those moments. So you're trying to understand the something that's almost impossible to understand, and that's
Right.
really what oftentimes the mind tries to compensate, because we're a population, we're a human race that wants to understand everything, and feel as if we can find the answer, the meaning behind it, and it's, in that case, I don't know if you can ever really do that. I mean, we think we can, but we probably can't.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about it. And I think, as if that tragedy weren't enough, um, obviously you were taken advantage of and groomed by someone close to you, and someone that you trusted. And I think, and I think just the fact that you're willing to speak about it and share it, and that must be put you in a very vulnerable position. So I want to applaud you and commend you for that, because I do believe that part of your story and your willingness to share it really it will help millions of others around the world. So if you're willing and you'd like to speak about that piece,
Yeah.
Please do so.
Yeah. So I am very close with pretty much all my uncles. I was looking for a father figure, obviously. And I was looking for someone who would openly talk about what I was struggling with. And I really, in a lot of ways too, I was looking for someone who would talk to me about my dad, talk to me about life, talk to me about things that maybe I couldn't discuss with my mom as a young kid. My uncle had been grooming me for probably, I don't know, close to 2 years prior to anything actually occurring. And for whatever reason, I had the cognizance at that time, I don't want to say to be aware of what he was doing, but it didn't happen. Nothing happened, right? So then when it was brought to his attention how obsessed I was with looking at these images, how destructive it was for me, and the fact that I talked about it incessantly, he then started talking to me about it. And when I felt that I could finally talk to him, and this is also coupled with the fact that my mom didn't really want to talk about it anymore, I felt like I finally had someone who would listen. So ultimately what ended up happening was I asked him directly what he thought happened to my dad. He alluded to the fact that he didn't have a way out. He alluded to the fact that he probably jumped, but he didn't say it explicitly. And then the next conversation we had, he then said, yes, he jumped. That was preceded by him. He followed that up with essentially touching me for the first time. When I found out, when I was told this, all this did really was reopen this quest, because I started getting to a point with it where I was looking at the same exact images over and over again. And I knew, like, okay, that's not my dad. Like I knew, what am I doing? I'm just looking at this stuff. I'm not a morbid person, but yet I'm looking at this stuff all the time. And then I actually saw a very graphic image, and I don't need to go into detail, but I saw this image and I called him immediately and I said to him that I saw this image and that it obviously messed me up. And then he wanted to see it. And so he did. I sent him the link and he then came to my house. And that's when everything pretty much started. And so all along, the only thing that was truly on my mind, really, even with kind of trying to process this and realize inherently that it was wrong or that it, like what was actually occurring, the only thing that was on my mind at that time was, okay, my dad jumped, and now I know he jumped, and now I can definitively find him. I will find him. That was the only thing that I cared about. So in some time, I woke up from this dream, so to speak, or this illusion, and I realized what had occurred and did my best just to live life normally. I didn't want anyone to have any suspicion about anything. I didn't want anyone to ask me any questions because all I thought was that it was going to bring about a bunch of repercussions that I didn't want to deal with. And so I said nothing. I lived with that shame and that guilt. And I thought it was my fault. So that's the summary of that whole situation. And that was followed up by me coping.
Now, and I just want to clarify for the viewers, when you're saying you wanted to find him, you mean you wanted to find an image of him because your father was found pretty early on.
Yeah.
And yeah,
yeah, exactly. So I wanted to find him in one of those images. I actually reached out to countless photographers famous ones who were there and took photos. And I asked them if they would be willing to meet up with me and show me some of these photos. They never responded, thankfully. But I asked them if they'd be willing to meet with me and blow up these images for me. And because I had seen in a couple of documentaries how they actually did do that for older widows. And so I can really look back on that and be grateful that that never occurred because I don't know what would have happened. I don't know if it would have just inflicted more pain onto me.
So that's a tough one. So let's close the gap on that. What happened to your perpetrator? I think that's an important piece too. He was brought to justice, and you were instrumental in that process. So I think we certainly don't want to classify it as a happy ending, but at least justice was served in some regards.
Yeah, so I got sober just over 6 years ago, and about 6 or 7 months into my sobriety, I came forward about it to a couple people close to me and decided to bring him to justice and bring him and talk, like deal with it legally. I didn't want to do it initially, but then I knew in my heart that it was the right thing to do. And he faced many years, but ultimately he took a plea deal and was sentenced to 7 years. He served 4 of them. So he actually got released last year, right before my book came out. The hardcover came out, and it was a lot to deal with. There was a lot of fear around that. But I know that I did the right thing in bringing him to justice. I know I did the right thing by speaking about it. And I hope, you never know, but I hope that by being vocal about it and open, that he'll never do it to someone again.
I agree. You definitely made the right decision, and you may not have been his first victim. Oftentimes, this is a serial pattern. So I definitely think you should be commended for that. So
Thank you.
That's a brave act, and I certainly applaud you. Now, what does that do to your family when you're bringing a family member to justice and exposing them? I mean, did that cause a rift throughout the family and were a family that was already struggling and suffering?
Yeah, we don't really communicate with them. The dynamic completely shifted, and being that we were very close before that, it took a lot of people by surprise too. Because really, in a lot of ways, I put on this facade that nothing happened. So, like I said before, and what I mean by that really is when people would see me interacting with him, they just assumed that we were close. I don't know if anyone ever had a suspicion. Maybe they did. I don't know. but they just assumed we were close. We were close. I looked up to him. I looked at him as a father figure. So when this came to light, they were certainly blindsided by that. And the dynamic has completely changed. And it probably, I mean, it will never be the same, obviously, but it had ripple effects that I think in many ways we didn't imagine. So
I'm sure. So we do have a question about your sobriety. Sure. And it says, how did you get 6 years sober? It must have been hard. And I don't know if you want to answer that question initially, or if you want to go in and really outline the entire story of how the drug addiction began, and then we can lead into that.
Sure. Well, so I mean, listen, in high school, when the abuse occurred and whatnot, and then in the aftermath, I was very recreational with drinking and smoking. I didn't have a problem. Maybe the signs were there, but not really anything that was worth mentioning or noting. When I got to college, that's when I had a little bit more freedom and I had access to harder drugs. And that's when I started to try harder drugs. And my story is certainly a story of progression when it comes to drug addiction. I didn't pick up my first drug and then immediately get addicted. I stopped a couple times in the beginning. I knew something was wrong when I had these weird feelings with it. So I was like, okay, I don't want to keep doing this. But my main drugs of choices were opiates and benzodiazepines, cocaine. And I went to my first treatment in 2013, a detox facility, and I got out of there and got high immediately the day I got out. And then I didn't stop pretty much until I got sober. But it was a period of about 4-ish years of doing harder drugs.
And not only, I think that, well, let's talk about how you also delved into criminality.
Yeah.
And how that spiraled, was a spin-off in some respects of your drug use. And I think that's really instrumental. And how you got sober was really that meeting and that first visit.
Yeah.
So let's jump into that.
Yeah. So as many addicts do, they look to do illegal activities as a means to support their habit. There are many things that I had to make amends for, stealing from people and things like that. But at the end of the day, I was an addict who would steal, rob, cheat anyone who was close to me, and anyone I didn't know either. But I was selling drugs. I don't say that proudly, but that's what happened. And I got arrested. So every single day, I worked in Manhattan at the time, my last year of active addiction. But prior to that, when I was in school, I would drive to and from the projects of Philadelphia every single day and pick up drugs. And then I'd go back to school and sell them on campus. When I got out of college, I did the same thing, except I would go to Newark or Harlem and neighborhoods like that. I got arrested in November of 2014 and was charged with multiple felonies. And it wasn't my wake-up moment by any means. In fact, I didn't get sober until obviously July 2015. So I spent those next few months trying to come up with ways to scheme around the system and beat these charges. And so I got put on a somewhat less severe form of drug probation. It's called conditional discharge. And I was told that I would have a drug test from a probation officer about 2 months into my period of probation. I would probably then have one more test in the next 6 months after that first test. So presumably 2 tests in a year. I couldn't get clean. And so what I ended up doing was, do you want me to go into the story now about this, or do you want me to wait?
Whatever let's just jump in. Let's
Sure. So I had notice of this drug test in the beginning of June of 2015. The test was scheduled for July 22nd. So pretty much 2 months to clean up my act. I kept delaying the time that I would do it. finally, I went to a smoke shop in Paterson, New Jersey, which is another bad area. Some parts of it are bad. And I purchased two bottles of this detox mouthwash. And I also purchased 2 bags of synthetic urine. And the detox mouthwash I put it in my mouth, and I would then have to swallow it after leaving it in my mouth for a little bit of time. And then once I finished the entire bottle, it would provide me with 45 minutes of clean saliva. So I went into the drug test in July and had the mouthwash already in my system. So I had the clean saliva, and I meet with my probation officer, and I sit across the desk from her, and I see on the top of her keyboard the mouth swab in the plastic packaging. And I remember thinking to myself in that moment, wow, this is going to be the easiest con I ever pulled off. And she looked at me, she had me sign a bunch of forms, and looks me in the eyes and says, when is the last time you got high? And I was like, I don't know, like it's been a while. She's like, okay, are you going to pass this drug test today? And I said, yeah. And she's like, are you sure you're going to pass this drug test today? I said, yeah. And she bends down and grabs a cup, and she's like, go pee in the cup. And of course, I didn't bring my fake urine with me. So I go into the bathroom, and there's a gentleman who goes in there with you to make sure, as he's looking through the angled mirror, you're not using anything that will alter the test results. So I'm thinking to myself, as I'm watching this gentleman turn the other way, basically, wow, I could have gotten away with it if I had the fake pee. And I don't know why. I look back and I'm like, I had it. I don't know why I didn't bring it with me that day. Like, there was no reason for me not to. I didn't, like, I could have brought it as a precaution, but I didn't. And I went back to meet with her, and she asked me if it was a cry for help or that I genuinely couldn't stop. And I was like, no, I want to stop. I really do. And now I can look back, and maybe it was a cry for help. I don't know. But she said to me, I'll give you one last shot. If you come back in 1 month and you're clean, I'm going to drop your charges. But if not, you're going to go to jail. I said, okay, fine. And I went home that day, and I was debating for, I don't know, it was hours. I remember my mom was away, and she's texting me, how did it go? I'm like, oh, I'm still here. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I have the devil on one shoulder, angel on the other, right? And I'm like, do I go back in a month, you bring the fake urine, fake the test, pass the test, and, continue to live this life? Or do I just finally give in and surrender and get help? And I'm talking to different people on the phone, giving me different pieces of advice on what to do. Some are telling me, just go back in a month with the fake pee, you're fine. And others are like, why don't you just get help? So I walked outside, and I sparked up a joint and immediately looked up in the sky. And this is where I had my white light experience, so to speak. And I remember just being blown away by how crystal clear blue the sky was. There was a lack of humidity in the air, and it immediately brought me back to the morning of 9/11. And I started crying. And for me to cry in addiction was extremely rare, but I was crying hysterically, and I just said, Dad, please give me a sign. I need help. And I had this sign from my dad, which I'll get into, but this fly lands on the railing that I'm leaning against. And the symbolism behind that is, after my dad died, my mom was told to look for the signs, and a fly landed on her nightstand, and that was her sign that my dad wasn't coming home. And we took that as it being my dad in a spiritual form, of course, but that fly would be our sign for the next 15 plus years. And in that moment in July 2015, here it was again. And I took that as my moment to finally just surrender. And I did. I filmed it on my phone because that fly just wouldn't leave. It kept turning, moving in a circle and stopping, and moving in a circle and stopping. And then I just said, you know what, I'm done. And I walked inside my house and called up a detox, and I said, listen, I'm not sober right now. I need a bed tonight if you can get me in. And they said, we can't get you in until Friday. And I said, okay, fine, book it. I want the bed. And that's my sobriety date, 2 days later, July 24th.
That's amazing. And I think that I love the sign from your father, and I know that you saw it many times throughout since his death, and that resonates with your family. So I think that they're all different types of signs, and that's one I've never heard before. Fly. I've heard butterflies, and pennies and things like that.
Right.
So I love that part of your story. Now, and I think it's also amazing. We should mention that even though you were addicted to drugs, you did make it through college. I mean, and
Yeah.
right.
Another miracle in and of itself.
And it wasn't just any college; it was Villanova. So that's very impressive.
Thank you.
Uh, and then you wanted to fulfill your father's destiny, and you went into a life of finance. How did that progress? And obviously that wasn't something that resonated with you because you didn't stick
Yeah.
with it. But I think that was, an homage to your father as well.
Yeah, it was. And I thought that if I made a career out of that and I was successful, that I'd be living up to his legacy or keeping his name alive while maybe making a name for myself. But at the end of the day, I was miserable throughout the entirety of that career. And I tried going back to it in sobriety and again was miserable. And it's another testament to my dad too, because he was looking to find his true passion in life. And I finally have done that. So I'm actually okay with the fact that I'm not doing that today, and the fact that I'm finally pursuing what does make me fulfilled.
And I think too that he would probably he wouldn't even want you to be in that career because it's something that he didn't enjoy.
Yeah.
So how did it come about? How did the book come about in you pursuing a life as an author?
I started speaking at school, high schools, primarily in the New England area. And I had voiced to a couple of people close to me how I like to write, how I did it a lot as a kid and journaled a lot as a kid. And I started speaking at high schools, and I had people coming up to me and saying, you should write a book about your story. And in the early stages of speaking, I didn't talk about the abuse as much. I certainly didn't go into any detail about it. Maybe I sort of alluded to it, but I didn't really go into any detail. And then I just said to myself, you know what? Let me just try it. Let me just start writing. And I started getting so much relief, and it was certainly cathartic, but I got so much release out of it. And I just continued to write. And finally I finished the manuscript, and that was a very arduous process in and of itself, but I was pitching for a long, long time, and I was about to give up on that and give up hope that it was never going to come out. The story would never be published. And finally it did get picked up, and here I am today. But I look back on that, and I certainly exhibit a lot of my dad's traits in those times because I never gave up on it.
And now it's kind of came out so it came out last year in hard copy. It came out yesterday in paperback form, and congratulations
Thank you.
on that. And that's a big accomplishment. So now what happens now? Do you are you still a motivational speaker, or
Yeah.
are you and you're in the process of, I know we spoke about you writing a second book.
Yep. So I'm starting now to book out for the speaking engagements. And we're going to have, it's going to be reliant on what's going on with COVID, of course. Last year, primarily 90% of them were via Zoom. I had a few in person, but nothing crazy because of COVID restrictions. And now it seems that things are getting a little less restrictive. So I should be able to get into schools more frequently now. But yeah, I am starting a second book. I actually am working on a couple other writing projects too. And it's a matter of trying to find that perfect balance. But once things sort of taper off a little bit with the book, with the paperback release, I'll probably be primarily just focusing on the speaking for a bit. Yeah.
And I think it's very important because you're speaking about resiliency, and really you turn tragedy into a triumph. And I think that that's really a message of hope that particularly young people need today. I think that we talk about just the impacts of COVID and what's that, though we expect that tragedy is in some regards, this generation's September 11th. I mean, they've lost parents and grandparents and living in fear of their own deaths early on in COVID. And I think that really to be able to come out of that is instrumental. I want to talk about the 20th anniversary as well. I
Sure.
think that people, and I think we spoke about this before, about how people who are alive in September 2001, and we speak about, we made a vow that we were never going to forget that day. We wanted to honor those victims and honor that day, and we speak about it every year. I mean, already it's discussions are occurring, and footage is being shown. I saw some tonight, and we're gearing up. It's September 1st. I mean, what does that mean to your family? I mean, obviously, your grief is in the spotlight, and it's never ending. Every year, it's the public's tragedy, but it's your private loss. I mean,
Yeah.
how do you process that? And do you wish that we would just stop commemorating that day?
I mean, no, I don't, because we vowed to never forget. And I think inherently people have already forgotten in some regard. I mean, we remember it on that day, but speak for myself, I know, and other 9/11 families, when I say something we live with every day. So we don't have the luxury of being able to just unplug from it once it's not shown on TV anymore. And so I don't want people to cease showing that footage, because it does allow people to either A, learn about it, or B, remember. But I think in a lot of ways we need to revert back to the same mentality that we had as a country, and just people in general. The constant projection of love and whatnot that was spread in those moments, right? There was not as much, in my opinion at least, there was not as much hate that was so open. And we refer to 9/11, I think, in a lot of ways as a catalyst as to what has occurred in the last 20 years, as opposed to at times, I don't want to say it has a negative connotation, but at times I feel like it does. That being said, in terms of the footage, it's unfortunate, right? I mean, it's a sensationalized event. People get to view my loved one and many others' loved ones' final moments whenever they want. But there's nothing I can do about it. It's completely out of my control. So as much as it hurts sometimes on social media, I see people maybe who are in a younger generation and they don't know how to handle it, or they mock it in some ways. I have to just remember they don't understand. They didn't live through it, and they don't. It doesn't affect them in the same way. Because if you didn't live through it, there's no way that it can.
I agree. I think about that in when our younger years, and people spoke about the Vietnam War. And I think because we were so distant from that, it was hard to understand, the aftermath of that, and what came about that. And that's how we feel about September 11th with younger people growing up. And I think about September 12th. I remember, those days, and I know you said it's the beginning of your life in many respects, but the close knit community, people were
Yeah.
banding together in this country for a very long time, certainly for years. And you spoke about hate, and it made me think about when you're saying there's less hate, but I wonder if there was. I mean, there was less hate in the U.S. because the hate was being projected someplace else.
True.
Right. I mean, we were banding together and really, and justifiably so. I mean, we certainly wanted those deaths. There was hatred to be found. We wanted those deaths vindicated. But I think that I wonder if that really set the stage and set the trajectory, like you said, for the hate in this country, because it perpetuated. And there was some, obviously the Muslim community really took the brunt of that here in this country, and there was some hate there. And it's similar. I think it's similar in some respects to COVID, right? I mean, the Asian population, the Asian American population are being victimized now because people think that COVID originated in China, and we're not going to debate that. It's I mean, there's certainly scientific validity there, but I think that really, I hope that your story just reminds people that, there's no place for hate. We can cause and effect and blame people for things throughout all of our history, but really, if we remember those days, the love and the support and the camaraderie really were so much more powerful than any of those acts of hate.
Right.
And even look where we are today in regard to, and I don't necessarily want to get into this in regard to Afghanistan. I mean, we're right back where we were 20 years later, and nothing has changed, unfortunately. And it's almost like we went back in time to, exactly 20 years later. It seems almost unimaginable.
Yeah.
Right. So now, how are your brothers and how are your brothers faring as well? I mean,
Yeah, no, they're all great. They no complaints on their end. They're all really good.
and they've all, I assume, went through their own process and grieving process and have all come out through the other side as well.
Correct. Yeah, they have.
So let's, we're into I know you have to wrap it up early. You have other engagements and we appreciate you being here, but let's tell everybody how they can get the book, learn more about you, where
Sure.
they can find it and purchase it, because I certainly think that people would really love to pick it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Majority of people go to Amazon. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kindle, Apple Books, Audible. We're getting into a bunch of local bookstores now. We're on local bookstores online too, but I'm trying to make a physical presence. But the problem is with COVID, it's been a little bit more difficult, especially with signings and whatnot. But my website is MatthewJohnBocci.com, and my social media stuff is all implemented into that. So you can find me on Instagram, Twitter.
All right, great. So Is there anything else? Did we miss anything? Is there anything else you want to tell the viewers before we wrap it up?
I think we covered it.
Now, what I do want to ask this. If anybody's out there struggling and with a drug addiction or any type of addiction, what advice would you give them moving forward? I mean, and Courtney's, I want to pull this up too. So we have Courtney here, and she's saying, "Thank you for sharing. I'm confident that you're helping many people with your story." So thank you, Courtney. That's a great comment, and I agree with that. But I want to give people who are struggling with this addiction some hope. I mean, because you were really in a very dark place, and you were able to turn it around. I mean, what would you advise them to do? I mean, speak to someone, a trusted friend, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'll certainly touch back to. I mean, listen, I tried ending my own life. I got to a point where I just felt I would never be able to pull myself out of it. And it was, in my opinion, a divine intervention. But COVID has certainly ignited a lot of mental health concerns and addiction concerns in a lot of people's lives, which I think is extremely important because people were isolating, right? And for me as an addict, when I was in like the heart of it, right? That's all I did. I didn't want to be drinking socially with people. I wanted to be by myself. And so with, obviously this is completely out of our control, a pandemic, but we had no choice but to isolate. And so I've sort of tried to be advocating for the fact that there is help out there. There are online meetings, there are hotlines that you can call, and there's no shame to be had in admitting to needing help. I think that was another reason why it took me so long. I was too egotistical, and I thought I could do it myself. And I'm so grateful that I finally surrendered and admitted to myself and to others that I needed help. And if people, family especially, and friends, they love you genuinely, they're not going to judge you. They'll be there for you every step of the way. And it's not easy. I mean, I had plenty of relapses. I mean, I thankfully have not had any, there has not been too difficult of a moment in sobriety for me the last 6 years that has made me contemplate going back to that life. But that's a testament to 12-step programs and things like that. But people, I think, as a community, as a society, sometimes are they can be ignorant. And I think that allows people to be ashamed of who they are. And the fact that if you want to admit to needing help, it's a judgment of your character, or that it's a judgment of you as a person if you are going through that, when in fact it's not. So I think most importantly, especially, people need to just always hold on to that bit of hope. And it may be extremely minuscule, but if you have anything left, hold on to it and just find that light, that remaining light that's left.
I love that. And I think that there's judgment everywhere. And if people are judgmental and they're judging you, then they're not your tribe. Those aren't the people that you need in your life. And
Exactly.
everybody has a story. I think that just from these interviews and podcasting, I've learned, if there's one thing I've learned, that everybody has a story and we all carry something, and we all need help. And I love that part of your story.
Yeah.
So I can't thank you enough for being here. It's always a pleasure, and I wish you continued success. I'm looking forward to finishing the book. I have started it, but I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm going to recommend it to anybody out there. Sway is really a great piece of literature, so please buy it. So
Thank
thanks everybody for tuning in. We have Justin, Courtney, Jason, Eric. Thanks so much for being here, and everybody else who tuned in. So. Until next time. So Chris, and of course, I always like to thank Chris, the producer behind the scenes, before we wrap it up, and I appreciate it. So Chris, you can play us out.
Thank you.